everybody, it's Robert Dunt from ArtTop10.com, and I'm very excited to be chatting to Phil Illingworth. Hello, Phil.
Hi, Rob. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, man. How are you doing? So you're surviving the lockdown torment?
Yeah, it's a little bit weird, I think. I found it quite difficult to concentrate, in actual fact, you know, with all of this going on. It's been strange.
Yeah,
you know, strange times indeed.
Yeah.
You know, we're fit and healthy so far, which is the important thing, yeah.
So are you a sculptor or a painter, or would you describe yourself as a bit of both?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. I mean, my practice is very mixed. I have been working predominantly to do with painting, but most of them are three-dimensional. So, there's, you know, sort of a little, not contradiction, but there's often a little bit of confusion there. And so they tend to be perceived as, a lot of the work tends to be perceived as sculpture, but in fact it's more to do with painting. It's to do with, you know, the history, the processes, the materials of painting, but reconfiguring them, if you like, in my own way. I suppose I'm trying to search for my own visual vocabulary, my own lexicon of ideas, really. So
the piece behind you, that's one of yours, isn't
it? This is a fairly recent one. It was completed in the last couple of months, and it's part of a short series of 4 called Sycophant. It's kind of a portmanteau, a play on words. It's one of the games I tend to play with titles. And I've got a couple of others here to hand.
Oh, yeah.
Most of my work is in storage, you know, because it's big and bulky, and because of lockdown, it's harder for me to access. So here's another one. So it gives you an idea of scale and the nature of the object.
It's really cool.
We have here an NDF that's coated in PVA, and then these are turned beechwood, painted with acrylic paint and varnish.
That's extraordinary. So that's MDF.
It's yeah. If I turn it around, you can see the back of it. So it's MDF that's built up in layers, and then I shape it on, you know, various machines and saws and things like that. And then here's another one. Make sure I get it the right way out. Here's another one, which is all part of the same series. So again, turned beech, but quite a different kind of finish.
It looks like.
But this is PVA that's used in industrial flooring.
Oh, wow.
So there's another one here, and then there's another one which I haven't actually got on my website yet, which stands on the floor.
Cool.
So it's not even wall. The other 2 I've shown you in this one are all wall mounted, but generally speaking, they are wall mounted. But sometimes I try and show work in other ways.
It's really interesting because they look like they're granite.
Yeah, these do. They've got this kind of stony kind of feel. They're all subtly different. I use different blends of PVA to get subtly different finishes.
Yeah.
Subtly different effects. Yeah.
And what inspires the shapes? I mean, it's a stupid thing to say. I can't help thinking one of them looks a bit like those aliens.
Natalie, my partner, calls it that one alien. It's a little bit like it's a bit like a spider's eyes in some way. Yeah, that kind of multiple eye thing. But that's kind of the inspiration is a funny thing. I'm trying to. I try to work spontaneously, and this is a big apparent contradiction with the work. You know, the work itself is very, very highly finished quite often, but it comes from very spontaneous sources. So I'll be, watching TV. I'll be sat on the train looking out the window, and I try and get myself into a zone where ideas ping into my head. and I scribble them down in my notebook. I keep a little notebook of shorthand ideas, visual shorthand. I'll scribble these down so that I don't forget them. And then that spontaneous idea, I then try and replicate as accurately as I can to the original idea in the real world, if you like. So while they're very, very highly finished, they all come from spontaneous thoughts, and quite often abstract thoughts. Sometimes they can be inspired by something that I might see in the real world. There's one that I finished, I think it was the last one I completed last year, around late December. And the inspiration from that was decking on a walkway next to a canal, sort of non-slip decking on a walkway next to a canal. It's a piece called Gnossienne.
You couldn't show us that little book, the inside of the one where you write the notes. It just looks so cool.
Yeah. So this book has been on the go for maybe 8 years. Wow. And it's full of tiny little scribbles. I'll see if I can find one that relates specifically to the pieces we were just talking about. Not sure where they are. They might not be in this book, actually. They might be in an older book. I mean, sometimes, I'm not sure how accurately these are going to... Okay, so I'll show you these. So these is for work. This one here.
Yeah.
This is the initial sketch for a piece called Schism.
Okay.
And it's... I don't know how much you can see on there, but there's this area here, and then you've got these two things hanging down either side, and then this is a side view. So this is a piece called Schism, and I'll send you through an image. It's a combination of canvas and wood and painted elements, and that's fairly close to the finished piece is fairly close to that original idea.
Okay. Oh, so it's really cool, actually. I like the because it's quite interesting to think you're almost drawing sort of abstract ideas in a way.
Well, that's pretty much what they are. Because what I'm trying to do with the work is I'm trying to talk about painting, but without actually making literal paintings. So, very little of my work is on a flat rectangle that goes on the wall. Yeah. So I'm taking the processes, the materials, and as I mentioned before, reconfiguring them in a different way. And by trying to keep them from abstract ideas, I'm trying to minimise the use of any kind of signifier.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's no kind of representation as much as can possibly be avoided, and that way I can then hopefully focus the mind on this idea that it's a discussion about painting rather than the ideas behind painting, if you like.
It's about like what you can get away with, or where you can take painting.
It's just it's not so much getting away with it. It's kind of it's poking around, if you like, poking around and I mean. Get away with sounds like I'm just taking a. It's kind of I hate to use this phrase pushing boundaries. It's a cliche. What I'm trying to do is poke around and kind of poke around in the dark a little way. I'm kind of fumbling my way along, trying to explore what is new territory for me. I know the idea of three-dimensional painting is, it's a fairly well-trodden path, that lots of people have been doing for many years. But I'm trying to find my own dialogue, if you like.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. that. It is you still don't have much choice today. There's so much stuff out there, so many different things. You've got to find your voice, your dialogue,
That's a very good point you make there. I mean, there's this thing, every now and again it pops up, painting is dead, blah 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 blah. But I think painting now is more lively than it's ever been. There's so much going on. The isms are pretty much non-existent. It's a kind of a free for all. There's no there's no flavour of the month particularly. You don't feel that you're obliged to follow a particular trend or fashion.
Yeah. That's a nice way to look at it. Actually, I like that. Yeah, it is. You can do. It's funny actually, because you can look at it in two ways, can't you? You can look at it as if there's just a massive space of chaos, or as you say, you can just go where you want and you're wherever you go.
I think so, and then hopefully then work will be judged on its merit rather than its place within a particular trend, or particular fashion. I'm a firm believer in meritocracy, and it's like there's Jerry Saltz was talking about zombie formalism at one point, and then there's this kind of what's dubbed bad art, or bad painting, that's kind of a very deliberate thing, but there's good bad painting and there's bad painting. So the world of painting in general, I think, is very rich, and from real high-end realism to real, people still exploring abstract expressionism and stuff, and everything in between. And hopefully I like to think my work fits in there somewhere. I mean, I'm not trying to defend anything I do. I'm making it strictly for me, and it upsets people sometimes. I think in some ways, how can that be painting? It's sculpture, but nobody can judge it other than people can judge it against their own references, but nobody can judge whether it's painting or not, other than me, because it's I'm making these statements and it's about my journey.
Yeah, if you feel it's a painting, it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is a stage where I go from my notebook into the real, making the work manifest in the real world, and most of that development of that, how I'm going to make it, how it's going to look, goes on in my head. I make very few working drawings to develop the idea. So most of it goes on in my head. And there's a point sometimes where I say to myself, that's not about painting, it's about sculpture, it's about something else. Okay. And I can't be specific about that. I find it hard to define. And in a way, I've come to recognise that that's part of the exploration and trying to hone in on what that distinction is.
Oh yeah, it's quite interesting actually. It's a slightly surreal comparison. I remember Robert Smith from The Cure saying that he'd write the songs out on pieces of paper, and sometimes they were songs, and then occasionally he felt they were like poems, and he'd put those in a box because they just felt like they were a different thing.
Yeah, I think for me it's quite intuitive, much as that example. I think it's probably quite an intuitive thing, and it's trying to. It's not an objective per se, but it's it might be nice to be able to pinpoint that. But then if I do pinpoint that, then maybe the journey's over. Maybe.
No, that's a good point. So let's show me some of the other things. Let me try and sort out the screen sharing thing.
So this is Nocien, and I think it was the last piece I made very close to Christmas, or very early this year. And it's actually it's one of the few rectangles, funnily enough.
Well, what's it made out of?
So I'll go back again.
Yeah.
There are three main components. There's the background, this area, which is MDF.
Okay.
And it's painted with, it's all acrylic, and it's acrylic and polymer and wood. They're the three basic materials. So the background is MDF.
Okay.
The green grid is it's 3mm square wood, which I built into a grid.
Okay.
Okay, and then it's coated with acrylic paint. It's coated with wood fibres and then painted.
Okay.
And then the stuff that's squeezing through is it's kind of a liquid polymer.
That's extraordinary.
It's kind of similar to a silicon, but it's kind of like a paint. So there you go. So this is an example. It's a fairly unusual example in that the grid, as I mentioned, I think before, it was inspired by non-slip decking next to a canal. and it's unusual for me to take inspiration from directly from the real world.
Okay.
So I'll find a couple of other examples that might. This is great that Wi-Fi starts to go on and go slow.
Yeah, well, it always does, doesn't it, at this point?
Yeah. So this is a broadly similar kind of idea.
Okay.
So this is aluminium, but it's a similar polymer that's kind of squishing through. And this is kind of more experimental, if you like.
Yeah. That also gives me a bit more of the Alien vibe to it. Like
maybe so. So I'll find you this one. This is the one that I showed you from my notebook called
cool.
Schism.
Oh God, that's cool.
Okay, so you see this area in the middle. This is plywood, and this is the part that hangs on the wall.
Okay.
I'll find a couple of different views of it. There you go. So you get this slight sideways view. This is plywood that's built up in layers and then shaped, sculpted, is varnished. And then these things hanging either side are canvas that I sew by hand. I'll see if I can get here's a kind of a closer idea. So you see this is all hand sewn. And then these pieces radiating out are lime wood.
Okay.
Which I, cut with a bandsaw and various other bits and pieces, and then shape into these kind of random shape.
I mean, for me, it's got a feeling of like a sort of Indian headdress or things like that.
Yeah.
Are these bad responses, or are they sort of?
Well, I mean, the funny thing is that I say I try and avoid signifiers, but somehow. When quite often it's a weird thing that this is an example of a work that's made of several different components, and they will come together. When the work is completed, all of a sudden all the components come together, and that's the point that I get to see the work for the first time too. Because so much of it goes on in my head, and they're all in different parts of the workshop or wherever, suddenly, like this is an example. It does look like an Indian headdress, but that hadn't been in my head at any point. It's kind of an accidental. And I don't really mind that too much. People will read things in their own way, whatever you do, whether it's a very literal painting or very literal representation of something or other, people will naturally read their own things into that. That's kind of unavoidable. Here's another one I want to show you, which is, this is another portmanteau. This is called Apokolips, and this is another, kind of portmanteau playing with words. And this is another one where this form, this shape, was what I noted down in my sketchbook, and I scanned it. It was maybe only 40 millimeters high in my sketchbook, something like that. And I scanned it. And then I was able to grid it up and get it up to its physical size. And this is another one that's made out of MDF. And the size of this is 72 centimeters high. So it's grown quite a long way from its original size.
It's big, isn't it?
Yeah. And you see, again, it's kind of got this three-dimensional form to it.
I love that bit in the centre. Is that canvas?
Sorry?
Is it canvas, the circle?
No. That's MDF as well in this instance. Now, so I've tried to keep the I've replicated this spontaneous scribble in my notebook as accurately as I can, but this is a very, very highly finished piece. I mean, there's layers and layers of paint built up to get, and then sanded back and repainted and sanded back, and it's got this kind of matte sheen. And then finally, after I'd finished the base colour, I used an airbrush with very low volume spray to build up tiny little speckles, which kind of I wanted the sense in this one to have the sense of being made out of something. You know, you mentioned those other ones, they look like they're made out of granite, and this one I wanted a sense of it to be almost made out of paint, you know, and I spent a lot of time trying to hours and hours and hours in actual fact trying to get this kind of finish.
But I mean, it's fascinating to look at, as you say, because it looks to me like it could be like rubber or sort of a weird plastic, or how you've got the MDF to do that is absolutely amazing, because it's just extraordinary. That
I've built up the layers to get the thickness. It's maybe it's about 30-40 millimeters. It might be 2 thicknesses of 18mm MDF. I can't quite recall now. Yeah. And then, you know, I cut it out with a jigsaw, and you know, and then sand it, and then shape it with a router and things like that too. There's a lot of handwork that goes into it, and you know, I made life difficult for myself by trying to replicate this scribble in my notebook, because there are some strange curves and kind of soft angles on there that I try to replicate quite accurately. But this is another one where, you know, colour is obviously an important factor. In painting. If you're talking about painting, it's obviously an important thing. But this one, and again, many of the other works, colour comes into it quite a long way down the line. I look at the form and finish the form, and then I start to think about colour. So again, it's this idea that it's trying to be about painting, rather than trying to represent any kind of particular idea. So sometimes I'll go for colours that might be, you know, that you think that those colours shouldn't go together, and sometimes I'll pick quite arbitrary colours. I'll mix a colour and say that'll do, you know, that's okay. So that it's this. I think I can give you a fairly good example of that one.
Yeah. It's interesting. So the colour doesn't come into your head as the first.
No. It comes a long way into the process usually. Right. Okay. So this one, this is called Parasite and the Host. And so if you look at it from the front, you have a number of panels, and they're articulated.
Yeah.
They're hinged. I've kind of developed this kind of hinge.
That's
and
right.
If I go on to there, if you look at it, you can see it from the side. There are colours all the way around the sides. And there are a couple of ideas behind this particular piece. One is this idea of articulation.
Yeah.
Means that the piece can be changed after the event. So it can be moved. It could be, in theory, moved by the viewer.
Yeah.
So it's the idea that the painting is never finished. You know, it can always be changed. You know, so you know, like, you know, once the paint's dry, that's it. You know, the thing is done with. But so I wanted to introduce this idea of something being temporary, in a temporary state. I have this thought that I'd love to be able to throw a bucket of paint into the air and then have it stay there. You know,
cool.
and you know, which is kind of the opposite of this idea, but it's something, you know, very, very fluid. And you know, I've introduced that into a number of that basic idea into a number of works.
I mean, the fascinating thing about looking at this one, is it does feel a bit like we're looking into your mind, into your kind of.
That's probably a scary place to be.
Into a sort of strange, abstract vision of something that's sort of...
So this one, you can see an idea of the hinges, and then these coloured bands all the way around.
Right.
And what I did here was I made the shape, and then I just made pencil lines where I was going to do, fairly arbitrarily.
Yeah.
This color band will be this wide, and this one will be this wide, and so on and so forth, all the way around the piece.
Okay.
And then I started mixing colors and just putting them on at random, well, as near as random as the human hand can do. Arbitrarily, that's the word that I need to use. And there'll be colors that go against one another that really don't belong, but it wasn't about the color, it was about the idea of color.
Okay. The idea of color.
So maybe I'll. Do you want to have a look at any more on here?
Yeah, show us a couple more. Absolutely.
Okay. I'll see if I can find another example of the kind of things we're talking about. Sort of about these long pauses.
I'd love to have a look at, after that, the spiky ones with the things sticking out.
Yeah. Okay. So this one, I'll show you. This is one of my favourites, and I made this piece after quite a long pause in my work.
Yeah.
This is quite a small piece of work. This is MDF, and in fact you can see the layers of MDF built up here on the side.
Okay.
So this one is only, I think, maybe 12 centimeters square, and then it projects out from the wall, and it's painted on the tip with this very soft baby pink with these black lines around it, and you've got this kind of conflict between this, very soft color that's often said to be feminine.
Yeah. Go on.
But then you've got these really dangerous things. Now, when it's installed in a gallery space, the spikes are at eye level.
Nice.
So so it's actually quite a threatening piece in some ways. But this piece, I finished it after I'd been working on other things, and I was having trouble getting back into my practice, and I made this piece to try and kind of get back into the way of working. Yeah. And when I first finished it, I wasn't really sure whether or not I was happy with it. And I did with it what I do with a lot of my works. I complete them, and then I finish what I was doing, what I'm making, and then I put it on the wall or on a chair next to TV or something like that, and I'll look at it for a few days, maybe a few weeks, maybe several months, and decide whether I'm happy with it. Yeah. And this one, I was having a few problems with it. I wasn't quite sure I was comfortable with it. But then I noticed a really peculiar thing. These spikes are made out of bamboo. Okay. And I positioned the holes. I kind of plotted out the holes so that the spikes, none of the spikes would be touching each other. Okay. But I noticed over a period of a few days that it must be the heat and humidity. Oh yeah. It was making the bamboo move. Really? Because I noticed that some of the tips were touching one another. And then another 24 hours later, they moved away again. Really? So it was just the heat and the humidity was causing the bamboo. You know how wood kind of distorts, wood warps. And this is a similar kind of thing. And that fitted in. I mean, it's real serendipity, but that fitted in absolutely with this idea of a painting never being finished. You know, the previous piece I showed you, the articulated piece, and it was like hallelujah. And I've called it. The title of it is "Carry Moonbeams Home in a Jar." It's the song "If You'd Like to Swing on a Star, Carry Moonbeams Home in a Jar." Blah, blah. There's this phenomenon that was noticed when I think it was it's a German term. I can't remember. I can't remember what the German word is, but it means swinging stars, and it's jet pilots flying at speed at night. Okay. Noticed a phenomenon where stars appear to move.
Oh, really?
And it's an optical illusion, but it was something that was reported. There's kind of tie-ins with UFOs and things like that. But it just dovetailed all at once. It kind of, all these ideas collided. The painting moving, this idea of optical illusion and perception, etc., etc. All ideas that are very closely linked in with my practice just came. They just kind of collided all at once, and because of that, it's one of my favourite pieces.
Oh, I spotted that one instantly. Did you know the artist Gunter Ecker?
Who again? Sorry?
Gunter Ecker? Who did?
I don't know. I'm terrible with names, but I might know the work.
Oh, yeah. He did these nail paintings.
Oh, yeah. I know. Yeah. Well, it's a weird thing. I realised that I've made quite a lot of works using spikes, and I don't really know where that came from. Shall I stop the sharing now and then?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Okay, so I've made quite a lot of works that use spikes, and I'm not really sure where that came from. It's kind of an accidental thing. But when I was adding stuff onto my website, I suddenly realised that there were quite a few spikes there, and there are quite a few. I don't know where it came from, but I noticed in my sketchbook there are quite a few. My notebook, I call it sketchbook. It's a notebook. There are quite a few things in there that I want to make that involve spikes in one way or another. Okay. And I think it's something to do with the artwork encroaching on the viewer, or on the viewing space, if you like, so that kind of relationship changes, between, rather than the artwork being a kind of a passive thing, it becomes it doesn't threaten the viewer, but there's a shift in the dynamic, maybe, and I wonder if it's something to do with that. It's another thing that I'm kind of exploring.
It's actually it's really interesting. Actually, the idea of the spike. It's almost because in a way that the works are quite pretty and intriguing and gentle. So in a way, the fact you want them to actually subversively spike the viewer is quite interesting.
The feedback that I get from my work is that it's quite playful, a lot of it, but also quite unnerving. In a way that people find hard to explain and pin down.
I think that when I say to you about the feelings of aliens, like the alien arts or the alien things, I think that's what I'm getting. I'm getting that unnerving in this kind of alien vibe.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's not really. It's not an intentional thing, because these little doodles come almost from the subconscious. These little, the seed of these ideas come from the unconscious. So maybe it's something to do with, I don't know. I mean, it's conjecture, but there's maybe the disquieting aspect of the work is to do with the way these things come together randomly. There is no formula to them. I'm, trying to avoid any kind of signify. Maybe it's something to do with that. And there's a thing where, I mentioned that I bring all these components together for the first time, and it's quite shocking sometimes.
Yeah,
I've said more than once, what the hell have I made here? What have I done? It's quite a shock.
That's quite interesting.
And I used to worry about it. It used to be unsettling, and then I came to embrace it. I came to realise that there's got to be something in that, and if it provokes a reaction from me, hopefully it'll provoke a reaction from other people. Yeah. And the thing that I would like is for people to think about my work after they've seen it. They'll see it somewhere and then they'll go away, and whether it bothers them or there's something about it that disquietens, but one way or another, it provokes thought, and I think that's that's an ambition I have for my work. That's the response that I would like, rather than saying, "Oh, that's nice," and wandering off looking at the next one.
Do you actually feel it's surreal in a way? It's a sort of their surrealist work.
I wouldn't categorise them as that. I mean, there's obviously a surreal element to them because of the nature of them, but that's not an intention. And I myself, I don't know how to categorise my work. That whole thing is a different question. Should work be categorised as such? And I'm not sure about that. I mean, it's useful to be able to try and explain yourself to the outside world, but really, I kind of don't care about those things, because I think because I'm working, I'm making this work for myself. I'm not making it to please other people. I'm making it to satisfy my own search. For quite what, I don't know.
And no, I just it's probably slightly weird to this, but I just cannot resist showing you something, because when I looked at your website a moment ago and I saw all the spiky things, when I was I've actually always been interested in painting in different ways, and it's probably a bit bizarre to show you one of my paintings, but it's just here.
No, go ahead.
I can't resist it, because it is actually so it's nails all hammered into.
Oh yeah.
Paint dribbled down them, and I suppose I was looking at ways of different ways of trying to paint.
But it's that kind of same idea. You're kind of you're altering the picture plane in a way, and there's, I suppose, a lot of the ideas come from this old thing about cave paintings, and painted sculpture, Greek and Roman sculpture and Egyptian sculpture, etc., all sorts of, Aztec. Every prehistoric tribe in the universe has painted the things they made. When we see these white marble sculptures in statues in. There were, as I understand it, generally painted. So there was no distinction between the two. So I suppose I'm touching on that idea. It's not a deliberate tack, but I do touch on that idea. But this like the work you've just showed me of yours, that you're kind of changing the picture plane and pushing away from the wall into the world.
And I think I was also looking, like you painted the ends of the spikes pink. I was looking at a way of trying to take the softness out of colour. So if you put the colour on top of nails, you had something harsh and mechanical and rigid and difficult against something pretty.
Yeah,
it's really interesting. Fascinating what you say about how everything used to be painted. Really, really interesting point, I think.
Well, I remember years ago I went to Lascaux, the caves in France, or rather it's a replica of the caves in France now. And I remember it was all in darkness, and for drama they had a few discrete spotlights around, and the guide was taking a small group around with a torch and using the torch as a pointer, so you get the sense that you're in a real cave rather than in a fiberglass construct. But one of the things that I remember, apart from that, and the fact that somebody had really bad BO, somebody in the crowd had really bad BO, I remember that too. But the thing that really struck me about it was, this thing about where you see hands, and then the maker has sprayed paint from their mouth onto their hand and left the imprint of the hand when they take the hand away. Like a kind of a spray, blowing paint. One of them was a hand that had been placed on a little projection on the wall, kind of a boss on the wall, and then sprayed around it. And then as you moved around it, you got this sense of the hand being in 3 dimensions. And that was obviously a really conscious decision that the maker of that work had made, and that made a big impression on me. It wasn't just some random thing. The maker of that handprint hand mark, and made a really, really deliberate, conscious choice to put their hand on that boss. And then, as you moved around, you could see how the hand had been, kind of embraced this kind of curved boss.
That's really interesting. It's really interesting. No, I'm fascinated.
Well, it appealed to me at the time.
But no, I've really enjoyed chatting. I've loved it. I feel. I mean, I know you don't want to call them surreal, but I do feel they are like a fascinating journey into your. It's almost like you've taken your visual ideas out of your head and put them on the wall of the places.
Well, that's what we all do, isn't it? Really, when we're cool.
No, it's really cool. Lovely, nice one, Phil. So thank you very much. And
my pleasure. I hope I didn't drone on too much.
No.
Good to talk to you.
Okay. Cheers, man. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bomba clock.